The wagon rattled over stones that felt sharp enough to split bone. Eliza Brennan gripped the wooden seat beneath her, fingers aching, and watched the valley open up ahead like a mouth she'd be swallowed into whether she wanted it or not. Behind her, everything familiar grew smaller until it vanished in the dust. Her aunt's letter had been brief. A position has been arranged. You'll work for Mr. James Holloway outside Crestwood. He needs help with his children. You leave Thursday. No questions asked. No choices given. Just instructions delivered like a bill that had come due. Eliza was 18, old enough to know what people whispered when a girl had no prospects and a family that couldn't afford another mouth. Old enough to understand that being sent away wasn't kindness. It was necessity dressed up in polite words. The driver, a man with tobacco-stained teeth and a hat brim so low she'd barely seen his eyes, spat over the side of the wagon. Holloway Place is just past that ridge. You can see the barn from here if you squint. She didn't squint. She just stared at the horizon and tried to imagine what kind of man took in a stranger to raise his children. A desperate one, probably, maybe cruel, maybe broken in ways that would make the work harder than any labor she'd done before. The ranch came into view slowly, like something reluctant to be seen. The barn sagged on one side, its red paint peeling in long strips. Fences leaned at odd angles, held together with rope and hope. The house itself was better, 2 stories, solid enough, with a porch that wrapped around the front. But the whole place had the look of something slipping, like a man trying to hold water in his hands. The wagon stopped. Eliza climbed down before the driver could offer help, her boots hitting the dirt with a soft thud. She smoothed her skirt, felt the weight of her single bag in her hand, and walked toward the porch. The door opened before she reached it. He stood there, tall and lean, shoulders broad beneath a faded work shirt. His face was weathered, creased at the corners of his eyes like he'd spent too many years squinting into the sun. Dark hair, streaked with early gray at the temples. He didn't smile. "Miss Brennan." His voice was low, careful, not unfriendly, but not warm either. "Yes, sir." "James Holloway." He stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in." The house smelled like coffee and wood smoke. The front room was simple, a fireplace, a table with mismatched chairs, a sofa that had seen better years. Everything was clean, but there was a plainness to it, like no one had bothered with comfort in a long time. 3 children stood near the table, watching her with wide eyes. The oldest was a girl, maybe 10, with dark braids and a serious expression that made her look older. The middle child, a boy, couldn't have been more than 7, thin and fidgety, his hands shoved into his pockets. The youngest was a girl, 5 or 6, clutching a worn cloth doll against her chest. "This is Sarah," James said, nodding to the oldest. "That's Ben, and the little one is Lucy." Eliza offered a smile. "Hello." Sarah didn't smile back. Ben kicked at the floor. Lucy buried her face in her doll. James cleared his throat. "They're not used to strangers." "I understand." He looked at her for a moment, like he was trying to decide something. Then he gestured toward the hallway. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the left. I'll show you around once you're settled." She nodded and carried her bag up the narrow staircase. The room was small but clean, a bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the valley. She set her bag down and sat on the edge of the mattress, feeling the exhaustion settle into her bones. This was her life now, a stranger's house, a man she didn't know, children who didn't want her here. She pressed her palms against her knees and exhaled slowly. Then she stood, smoothed her skirt again, and went back downstairs. The work was harder than she'd expected. Not the cooking or the cleaning, those were familiar enough, but managing 3 children who looked at her like she was an intruder, that was something else. Sarah barely spoke, answering questions with nods or shrugs. Ben ran wild whenever he could, disappearing into the barn or down to the creek, forcing Eliza to chase after him. Lucy cried at night, soft sobs that echoed through the thin walls. James worked from dawn until dark, fixing fences, tending cattle, chopping wood. He came in for meals but said little, his presence heavy and quiet. He wasn't unkind, he just wasn't anything. At first, Eliza thought he resented her, but after a week, she realized it wasn't resentment. It was something deeper, grief, maybe, or exhaustion so bone-deep it had hollowed him out. One evening, after the children were in bed, she found him on the porch, sitting on the steps with a cup of coffee in his hands. The sky was bruised purple, stars beginning to prick through the fading light. She hesitated, then sat down a few feet away. "They're asleep," she said quietly. "Good." Silence stretched between them. Eliza picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "How long has it been," she asked, "since their mother passed?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was rough. 2 years. Fever took her in 3 days. "I'm sorry." He nodded but didn't look at her. Sarah remembers her the most. Ben pretends he doesn't care, but he does. Lucy was too young. She doesn't remember much. Eliza watched the way his hands gripped the cup, knuckles pale. "They're lucky to have you." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Don't know about that." "They are." He turned his head then, meeting her eyes for the first time in days. There was something raw in his gaze, something that made her chest tighten. "You don't have to stay," he said, "if this is too much." "I'm not leaving." "Why not?" She thought about the answer, about her aunt's cold letter, the empty space she'd left behind, the way she had nowhere else to go. But she didn't say any of that. "Because they need someone," she said simply, "and so do you." He looked away, jaw tight, but he didn't argue. Weeks passed. The rhythm of the ranch became familiar. Eliza learned to anticipate when Ben would try to sneak off, when Sarah needed space, when Lucy needed to be held. She learned the way James took his coffee, the way he favored his left leg after long days, the way he looked at his children with a longing so fierce it hurt to witness. And slowly, something shifted. Sarah started helping with supper, standing beside Eliza at the stove, asking quiet questions about spices and timing. Ben stopped running as far, lingering closer to the house, building stick forts in the yard where Eliza could see him. Lucy started calling her Miss Eliza instead of hiding behind furniture. James noticed. She could tell by the way he watched her sometimes, his expression unreadable but softer than before. One afternoon, she was in the barn gathering eggs when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find James standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "Need help?" he asked. "I'm almost done." He stepped inside anyway, leaning against a post. "You're good with them." "They're good kids." "They weren't before you came, not really." Eliza set the basket of eggs down, brushing straw from her hands. They just needed someone to see them. "And you see them." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I do." He moved closer, just a step, but it felt significant. The barn was dim, dust motes drifting in the shafts of sunlight. She could hear the horses shifting in their stalls, the distant call of a hawk. "I see you too," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "James." "I know I shouldn't say it. I know you're here because you had nowhere else to go. I know this isn't," he stopped, shaking his head, "but I can't keep pretending I don't notice. The way you are with them, the way you make this place feel like a home again." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm just doing what I was hired to do." "No, you're doing more than that." She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to name the thing that had been growing between them, slow and quiet and inevitable. Before she could speak, Lucy's voice rang out from the yard, calling for her. The moment broke. James stepped back, clearing his throat. "I'll let you get back to it." He left the barn, and Eliza stood there, heart pounding, the basket of eggs forgotten at her feet. The town of Crestwood was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Eliza went into town with James and the children one Saturday, riding in the wagon as it clattered down the main road. People stared. She saw the way the women whispered behind their hands, the way men tipped their hats to James but let their eyes linger on her a little too long. She felt the judgment, like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. At the general store, A woman with sharp eyes and a tight bun approached them. "Mr. Holloway, I didn't realize you'd hired help." "Mrs. Pemberton," James's tone was polite but cool. "This is Miss Brennan. She's been helping with the children." "I see." The woman's gaze swept over Eliza, assessing. How convenient. Eliza felt her face flush, but she kept her expression neutral. "Good day, Mrs. Pemberton," James said, steering the children toward the counter. Outside, after they'd loaded supplies into the wagon, Sarah looked up at Eliza. "Why was that lady mean to you?" "She wasn't mean," Eliza said, though it felt like a lie. "She was," Sarah insisted. "I could tell." James glanced at Eliza, something apologetic in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. On the ride home, Eliza stared at the horizon and tried to ignore the knot in her chest. She'd known this would be hard. She just hadn't expected it to hurt so much. That night, after the children were asleep, James found her in the kitchen. She was washing dishes, hands submerged in soapy water, when he spoke. "I'm sorry about today." She didn't turn around. "You didn't do anything wrong." "People talk. Let them." He moved closer, standing beside her at the sink. "It bothers you." "Of course it does." She scrubbed a plate harder than necessary. "But what am I supposed to do? Leave, prove them right?" "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." She set the plate down, turning to face him. "Don't I? You hired me because I had nowhere else to go. They all know that. They all think I'm just some desperate girl taking advantage of a widower." "That's not true, isn't it?" His jaw tightened. "You think that's what I see when I look at you?" "I don't know what you see." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers, not quite touching. "I see someone brave, someone who came here with nothing and gave us everything. I see someone my children love. Someone He stopped, shaking his head. "I see you, Eliza, and I don't care what anyone else thinks." Her throat tightened. "James, I mean it." She looked up at him, at the rough lines of his face, the sincerity in his eyes. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she let herself believe it. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with teeth sharp enough to bite. The ranch work grew harder, the days shorter. Eliza spent her mornings breaking ice on the water troughs, her afternoons keeping the fire roaring, her evenings bundled close with the children, reading stories by lamplight. James worked himself to exhaustion. She could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, the way his hands shook when he came in from the cold. One night, he collapsed into a chair by the fire and didn't move for an hour. Eliza brought him coffee, setting it on the table beside him. "You need to rest." "Can't, too much to do." "James, I'm fine." He wasn't. She could see the strain in every line of his body, but she didn't push. The next morning, she woke to find him already outside, chopping wood in the pre-dawn gray. She pulled on her coat and boots and went out to join him. "What are you doing?" he asked, frowning. "Helping." "You don't need to." "I know." She picked up an armful of split logs and carried them to the pile. "But I'm going to anyway." He watched her for a moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then he went back to chopping. They worked in silence, side by side, until the sun crept over the ridge and painted the valley gold. The turning point came in late January. Ben got sick, a fever that spiked in the night and left him shivering and pale. Eliza stayed by his bedside, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, coaxing him to drink water. James paced the hallway, helpless and terrified. "He'll be all right," Eliza said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "You don't know that." "I do." She looked up at him, her voice steady. "He's strong, and he's not alone." James sank into the chair beside the bed, burying his face in his hands. "I can't lose him." "You won't." She reached out, placing her hand over his. He didn't pull away. Ben's fever broke 2 days later. The relief was overwhelming, a weight lifting that left them both shaking. James held his son close, whispering words Eliza couldn't hear. Sarah cried into Eliza's shoulder. Lucy climbed into her lap and didn't let go. That night, after the children were asleep, James found Eliza on the porch. The air was cold, her breath misting in front of her face. "Thank you," he said. "You don't have to thank me." "I do." He moved closer, his presence warm despite the chill. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "You would have managed." "No," his voice was firm. "I wouldn't have." She looked up at him, and the space between them felt impossibly small. "Eliza," he said softly, "I need you to know something." Her heart pounded. "What?" "I'm not good at this, at saying what I feel, but you," he swallowed hard, "you've become more than just help. More than just someone I hired." He paused, his hand reaching for hers. "I care about you, and if you'll have me, if you'll have us, I want you to stay, not as hired help, but as family." She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. All she could do was lean into his touch and nod. He kissed her then, slow and careful, like he was afraid she might disappear. And when he pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, she felt something settle deep in her chest. Home, this was home. Spring came with wildflowers and rain that turned the valley green. Eliza stood on the porch one morning, watching the children play in the yard. Sarah was teaching Lucy how to braid flowers. Ben was building something with sticks and twine, his tongue poking out in concentration. James came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You happy?" "Yes." "Good." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Because I am too." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. The ranch still needed work. The town still whispered, but none of it mattered anymore. Because she had this family, this love, this life she'd never expected to find. And it was more than enough. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.